the 3BA podcast, where bourbon, boners, and being awesome isn't just a catchy tagline, but actual categories in which we discuss different topics every single day. My name's Garrett, and I'm back again with another episode with my co-host, Nick. Nick, how's it going, my friend?
Hey, good to be back on another Thursday.
That's exactly right. Nice to see you again. I think this is going to be a thing. I think you're going to be our regularly scheduled Thursday co-host. How do you feel about that?
Just put it on your calendars.
Put it on the calendars. You heard it here first. The last time you were here, we hit on some really key things for new beginners when they get out there. The first one was be nice to people. Being nice to people is so crucial. Just being able to ask somebody when they get their good stuff. I know that's a generic way to do it, but finding out their schedule. Just being a general good human being to somebody else will get you really far in this game. The other thing you talked about was asking questions. You asked me questions, not as many as you ask your other friends nowadays, but you asked questions to start. And then finally, we talked about making a budget of whatever you want it to be, a budget on buying a bottle, a budget on what you want to spend to drink at a bar, a budget on where you want your collection or your drinkers to be. There's always that kind of fine line that you and I discussed on buying a new bottle and whether or not to spend money on something we haven't tried. But that being said, we also said that there were some other areas that we believe that beginners need to focus on, right? So we got through that whole podcast, that whole episode, and you and I discussed it afterwards. We talked about it, and we said, man, there's still a lot of stuff that I think beginners need to know before they get out there and they're buying, $1,000 bottles on the secondary or trying a $200 bottle at retail, right? So there were some other things that you talked about. So go ahead. One of the ones that you brought up right away is you should get out there, right?
So yeah, I think as soon as you're able to understand some information about the bourbon and whiskey scene, and as soon as you're able to set yourself up some guidelines as to what you're trying to do and where you're comfortable at, I think the next thing is to get out there, and not just get out there locally, but also get out there to other areas, other states. So there's a whole big world out there, and I think hunting bourbon is something that can take you to new, interesting places that otherwise you might not go.
I completely agree. And we talked about breaking that down, right? So you just alluded to it. Go to a different bar. If there's one in your town or in your state or somewhere that's been told to have a great bourbon or whiskey collection, go there and try some whiskeys. No one's telling you can't do that, right? I mean, how many bars have we been to together where you're like, oh, I've always wanted to try that, and they have it. How much is it a pour? Let's give it a shot. I mean, we've done that a lot.
Yeah, we always check that list first, I think.
Absolutely.
And speaking of, it always reminds me of a story you told, which here locally you went out and found a place, and they might have had one of these with a nice shiny gold top on top, and it was a great opportunity for you to try something that nowadays would probably be something for a lot of people would look at the price list and be saying, that's untouchable.
Hey, you're exactly right. I'm so glad you brought that up. It was priced, in my opinion, a little low than what I thought it should be. And you'll never know where you might be able to walk into and they have a bottle that is, in this particular case, somewhat of a white elephant, a unicorn bottle. Some would call it that. And he had it on the shelf and didn't know what he had. So you never know unless you go out and try.
I think the other thing, too, is you go out to new places, even if you're just out casually or you're on a business trip and you go to a place and you've never heard of it. It's a local distillery. Whether it was, bottled there, aged there, or they're actually distilling their own, it's a great opportunity to get out and see different things. And I think, the different regions of the states, kind of have their own different profiles, their own climates, and all that obviously drives into a different product. And
Sure.
I'm sure you'll have plenty of episodes that talk about all that fun
Oh,
stuff.
yeah. But to your point, that is exactly what we're alluding to here is you're going to get a different taste, a different product in general. You're going to get a different barrel expansion and contraction. You're going to get a different, rate of dissolution in their mixture and their proofing down to the spirits. You're going to get different evaporation rates. You're going to get different, to your point, climates of, well, it was hot all year round versus, up in the northern part of the United States, it's hot and cold, or maybe cold all year round. So you're absolutely right. And that goes back to what our second part of the get out there was, and that was go visit some distilleries. So he was saying get into the different states and areas around you, but we also talked about go to the distilleries. This is primarily about bourbon, but we're not excluding other bourbon recipes. A saying that you'll probably hear me repeat on multiple episodes, and if you're just getting into bourbon, here's a fun one to keep under your hat. All bourbon is whiskey, but not all whiskey is bourbon. I've heard that on other podcasts. I've seen it on other vlogs. I also know that and learned that very early on. But that recipe can be used across the whole United States and still be called bourbon. For those purists out there, most of them would tell you that bourbon needs to come from Kentucky. Those super purists would say that it has to come from Bourbon County. And the extra super traditionalists will tell you that Bourbon County is different than what it was back when Kentucky became a state. So back in 1792, the year that Kentucky became a state, Bourbon County was a lot different than what it is today. And so those distilleries that are still claimed to be in Bourbon County may be in a different county today as they've shrunk, but it was from Bourbon County back then. Anyways, that's a history lesson, but that kind of brings me to the visiting of the distillery and another point that we made and we talked about. So before I move on from it, go out and visit distilleries. Visit your local craft distilleries. Visit the big guys. Plan your trip to Kentucky. I'm not going to sit here and tell you which hotel to go to or what bus service to use, but I will tell you that in my time, I've been fortunate enough not only to live there, but also to visit there quite often. And I've gone to almost all the distilleries that are there, all the big names and the small names. You've been to a few.
Yeah, and I think what's cool about that is you go to these distilleries and you can see everything from something that was constructed within the last 5 years to something that's been around for hundreds of years.
Oh, hundreds of years and still have some of the same buildings and rick houses that they had 100 years ago. A couple hundred years ago, right? 1792? I mean, man, we're getting up in time. Additionally, kind of to the point that I was making, when you're visiting these places, you also get a chance to learn some history. That was another topic that we brought up for beginners, right? So you said something, I'm going to kind of bring it back to the overall, the higher picture, and that is figuring out your what and your why. You said it more elegantly than I did.
Always do.
Which is?
What is your why?
What is your why? Yeah. I said figure out your what and your why. He said what is your why? Before we get into that, I'd be very, very non-bourbon-esque of me to not tell you what we're drinking because
what is this
we should probably started with that. Hey, we're always learning, we're always changing here on 3BA. Today it was my pick. The last time you were here, I don't know if you know this, but you brought me a sample of the Bardstown Discovery Series. It was Discovery 8.
No, this was Discovery 2. It was the old guy.
Oh, it was the old guy. I'm so sorry. It was 2. They're on 8. That's what we discussed.
They're on 8, yep.
Yeah. I'm so sorry. So you brought me 2, and then one of my favorite of the Discovery Series is Discovery Series 4. So I thought, why not have it for us today to have while we're doing this podcast to kind of follow up on the last one. So what we're drinking today, Discovery Series 2, or we did 2 last time, Discovery Series 4. For me, again, without tasting notes, I've been trying to stay away from those. This is one of my favorites, if not my favorite Discovery Series to date.
I don't know too many people that dislike this guy.
Correct. Top, what would you say, top or top 2 at least?
Top 2 so far. Top
2? Okay. Would you argue that it would not be the best?
3's a fighter.
Okay. All right. I haven't had 3. Boy, I don't know if I've had 3 in a while, but I have a few bottles of the 4 left that I'm kind of conserving so that I can continue to have that flavor profile as it goes on.
Well, when you run out, I know a guy.
Yeah. Oh, do you? It's so funny. That being said, this is a perfect example of a distillery that is relatively new.
Yeah.
We discussed it briefly last time. We're only going to discuss it briefly this time. But Bardstown is a new and upcoming distillery that sourced a lot of their juice and still does. For those of you who don't know what source means, we'll go on to that into a different podcast, but very briefly, sourced is getting your bourbon from another place. So not your own aged spirit. You're actually getting it from somewhere maybe aging it at your facility for a brief time, and then barreling it and bottling it yourself. Well, not barreling it, but bottling it and labeling it and packaging it yourself.
Yeah.
So a lot of distilleries do that.
Yeah, and another thing that they've done, especially with their Fusion and Discovery lines, are these blends. And as I like to think of it, it's got to be one of the coolest jobs in Kentucky to sit around and blend different whiskeys and ryes and come up with something that tastes this good.
Oh, and I did say barrel, and I wasn't off. Sometimes they'll put it in different barrels, like the cask finish, and I don't know. There was one that I was recently privy to seeing. It's a new wine cask, a different wine. I'm sorry, I don't know the name, and not only that, but I'm not as educated in wine as I am in bourbon, so I would probably even butcher the pronunciation. But
a French guy, huh?
it was a French wine. Yeah, it's a newer distillery. And what they're doing is, while they're producing their spirit, while they have barreled their spirit and they're putting it in the rick houses and storing it and aging it, they're using a sourced bourbon from somewhere else. And they're blending and they're bottling and they're trying to get a flavor profile established in the hopes that their spirit tastes like that when it gets mature enough to be released. We also discussed, just very briefly, if you ever get a chance to visit the distilleries in the Bardstown, in the Kentucky area, you'll see that Bardstown specifically, Bardstown Distillery, is very modern. It's compared to your Buffalo Traces and your Four Roses and your Heaven Hills, they're very new and modern rick houses. These are not your old school wooden, black with the panels open on the side. These are brand new rick houses.
Yeah, it makes you sometimes think, is it a better or worse thing?
I'm glad I'm alluding to that too. I don't know that answer. But
get out there and explore.
I was just going to say, but we're tasting a product that is pretty darn good from source material, from source product, but still very good. Now, back to kind of the point we were making. What is your why? I said find out what's your what and what's your why for both of them. For you and I, we see things very similarly in some of these aspects, and we also differ quite drastically in some of these aspects. I want to break it down into two sections. I'm a charts and graphs guy here. I'm going to go to the left side, and we're going to figure out the what. So what are you doing when you get into the bourbon game, or the bourbon life, or the bourbon world, on your bourbon journey? Okay? I broke this down for you, and I'm gonna ask you yours, and we're gonna talk about it. So the what, I broke it down into what do you want to get out of buying, tasting, drinking bourbon? Simple answer is this. We can agree on this. We like to drink good stuff. We like to drink good bottles. We like to drink good juice. Call it what you want. We like to drink it. I think we can agree there.
Yep.
Additionally, I know as time goes on, I'm going to get chastised for what's on my wall.
Probably.
Oh, 100%. 100% I'm going to get called out. I've said this before. I don't think I've said it yet on the podcast, so this might be a first. But every bottle you see here, aside from 3 that I can name and I can point to at some point, I've tried everything on this wall. Does that mean I've tried mine? No. But I have tried in a bar, getting out there and visiting with people and tasting theirs, or having the opportunity to taste it at a distillery. So everything you see here, I've tried, except for 3 bottles. That's why there are some on shelves, and that's why there are a ton that are open on the bar. So my what in this aspect is a little different than yours. I like to collect. I like to collect verticals. That's what they're called in the bourbon world. I like to collect verticals. It doesn't matter what your cup of tea is. If it's Eagle Rare, if it's Woodford, if it's Wild Turkey, every distillery, every variety, every version of a product has a vertical. And if you really want to get deep into the history, as I know you like to do, some of these verticals go back as far as 2002 and beyond. I mean, you could go back to the 80s, the late 80s. Some of the Pappies that in the world that people know about, those get aged out as well. I am fortunate. I guess it's fortunate. I'm thankful to know some people that have something as crazy as every George T. Stagg Sr., the antique collection, for those who don't know, every one that's ever been released, they have every single one. That's a vertical. So my what am I doing, aside from my why, we'll get to that next, but my what is I love collecting the verticals. So this is where we get a little different. So tell them, what is your what? What are you doing?
So I think my current what is probably finding the oddball that maybe nobody's even heard about. I mean, somebody somewhere has, obviously, but there's so many products on the shelf that a lot of people just skip over, or things that you've never heard of. The other week, I was traveling through the Appalachian and stopped in and found a bottle and never even heard of the label. It was in basically a ceramic bottle, which was kind of cool.
That's got to be an old one.
And it was 10-year MGP.
Oh.
And so for $60, Nick's swinging. And so I was not unhappy about that purchase. But, it's sometimes finding those things that are just obscure that no one's ever had. And all that is to say, for me, it's been about almost exploring bourbon in the profile sense of finding new flavors. And again, all that goes back to being from different areas, having different mash bills, different water sources, all those good things. So a lot of it's been that, and it trickles over into other things, right? All of a sudden you begin to experience sensories in depth, right? Mm-hmm. So when you go and you smell something, well, what else do you smell? What do you smell in it? What do you smell under it? Mm-hmm. What do you smell on the leading edge and on the trailing foot of it? And so doing that on the palate as well. So it's allowed me to almost explore my own senses when I go through bourbon, and then apply it in other areas as well.
You and I have done this. It's not so much I'm anti-tasting notes. I feel as though I have a different focus for what we're doing at 3VA. That's not to say that you and I don't do tasting notes together, right? We've done it hundreds of times, literally hundreds of times. I don't want you all to think that Garrett is anti-giving you a flavor profile. I would like to say that I believe that a flavor profile is different for every single person. Because to your point, you're exploring your palate, right? So maybe you're also exploring bottles, and we can go really down a rabbit hole here, but ultimately it's your palate, right? You're going to like or not like how that bourbon hits your palate how differently it hits mine, right? So I can say this is the best Bardstown Discovery Series that's ever been released. You can say it was number 3. You can taste something extremely different than what I can because your palate has been seasoned to this point to taste different aspects of notes and water and filtration and barreling that we could go on for days, and we could argue and have a difference of an opinion. So again, that's why for those of you out there who are like, well, tell us what it tastes like. It's going to taste different for you. It's going to taste different for him. That's why I'm not anti-notes. We're not going to do it here. You and I can talk all day. Maybe one episode we finally break down and you can give all your crazy notes. I'm cool with that. But to your point, your journey has led you down I've seen you grow over the last couple of years that you've done this with me. You're now getting into I really like this one because it's so unique. That's the word that you just used. This is so different. Can you believe that it tastes like this? Or can you believe the funk? Or can you believe when I cracked that plastic top off of this old school 1986 Jim Beam, how different it tastes than the Jim Beam that's out on the shelf right now?
I think for me, one of the things that's super cool is cracking a bottle and saying, I've never tasted anything quite like this. That's some of the fun of being blinded at times too.
Oh yeah.
When somebody gives you a sample or a pour and said, what do you think about it? And that hit of, I don't know, I like it, and I know I've never had it. And then that's the curiosity that stirs up in me. And God, I hope it's a $30 bottle that's always available.
Yeah.
And some of those are out there. And I think, to each their own on finding those for themselves.
Mm-hmm. And to each their own on what they want to do with them. I don't want to. There's an elephant in the room that we've tiptoed around. We've done this twice now, 2 episodes in for you and I. Not 2 episodes into the podcast, but 2 episodes of you and I standing next to each other. We're tiptoeing around the subject. I'm just going to rip the Band-Aid off and say, is it something you drink? Is it something you keep? For instance, what you see up here. Or is it something that you trade or possibly sell?
Yeah, I think you look at it in multiple views, right? You can sit down on a Friday night, pour yourself a glass, sit down by a fire, and enjoy it that way. You can look at it long term as it's a ration. It's a hedge against other things out there.
Sure.
You know, it is a high proof spirit. It can be used for more than drinking. But yeah, that's true. There is a market of people out there who are looking to trade and fill holes on their shelf where it's difficult to find things, and what it takes to get there and do that as well.
Yeah, I truly believe that it's to your point, to each their own. I don't want to keep hammering that, but the what is yours, and figure out your what before you get into this and waste a lot of money. I can't put it any other way than don't just go out and spend thousands of dollars, because it's thousands of dollars to get into some of these bottles, if you don't know why you're doing it or what you're doing it for. So that brings me, you see what I did there? So why? So tell me about your why, Nick. Your why is different than mine, but tell me why bourbon?
Well,
Why?
I think one of the whys is very visual. I think one, your collection is presented in a very, very outward way. You walk down here and boom, here's everything. I don't have that.
No, I know you don't.
It's literally in a bunker.
Yeah.
I know in my head where everything is and what's all in there.
Sure.
But nobody else sees it. I have a bourbon cart that helps me moderate what is there and what is open and what's going through.
What are you drinking? What can I give away? Yeah, I know. I got that too. Yeah.
So for me, part of the what too is even like how many open, how many closed. Mm-hmm. Is there a limit? I don't know. You're finding out, aren't you?
Yeah.
But the why has shifted over time too, and I think it's a sign too of personal growth through your own bourbon.
I was going to say that. Yeah, I was going to say your why has definitely changed.
It changes over time. You know, I've met incredible people over the past couple of years solely in the venue of bourbon. People who I have a friendship with now, and that it's not strange for me to just say, hey, want to come over and hang out. And it's somebody who, in passing, at any other time in life, that I wouldn't even look at twice and think, hey, I bet me and that person could have an awesome conversation. And now we can do it over a glass of bourbon. So it's been really cool in that sense, to the why. Again, I think that stage one of be a nice person, be kind. You find those other people in that space, and all of a sudden, you open up the social aspects to it too. And a lot of life is just networking and meeting people. And if it's not experiences that you have first person, it can be one from a second person perspective, and have a new acquaintance that you found in your bourbon journey share with you their life stories and experiences.
I mean, I feel like you asked the questions that we're kind of asking each other, and we know about each other, but we're doing it for the sake of this particular podcast. But asking somebody what got you into this, I've asked that question before. How long ago did you get into bourbon? Oh, you got it 10 years ago. Cool. I bet you got some cool. I bet you have some stories. We could swap some stories. And then you have the person who started. I was watching a podcast. I'll leave out which one it was, but I was watching a podcast that was recommended to me. Watching a podcast. I was listening to a podcast, watching their YouTube clip of another podcast that was recommended to me by a friend. And in their podcast, they literally admitted buying 500 bottles of bourbon within their first year, or something ridiculous. I'm pretty sure the number was 500. And for those of you out there who might know what I'm talking about, I'm not knocking this particular podcast or
it's an approach.
It's just that is not what I would recommend for somebody who is starting in this journey, this aspect of alcohol. I would say moderate, and I think that's an aggressive number for somebody just starting out. If you have the means and you want to do that, by all go, to each their own. To your point, I've asked so many questions that have gotten different stories, and the things that we're talking about here today. Like, you have a story. I mean, your story of getting into bourbon and standing in lines. Those of you who don't know this, we could tell a lot of stories about each other. But I've seen Nick turn to a complete stranger in line and say, "Hey, what are you looking for today?" It's a very honest, open question. And then they're like, "Oh, I'm hoping to get Buffalo Trace." It's a common answer, right? Or I'm hoping to get Blanton's. Or I'm hoping to get, Weller Antique. Okay, cool. You know what? I know that not only do I know that there are ways that you can get them, but also there's other things that taste just as good. Other products, other bottles that taste just as good or have a unique flavor profile that I think you should try. And then he engages them in a conversation. I literally watched him make friends with a complete stranger and just be like, "Yeah, let me know, text me, call me, we'll get together." He tells me the following week, "Yeah, you remember that guy we met in line at, when there was a release on Tuesday? Yeah, I remember." He goes, "Yeah, came over, nicest guy, brought me a sample, traded some pours. He picked up a bottle that I had, and I gave him one, and he gave me one, and then we sat down and talked. Nice guy." And now, 2 years later, he's one of the people that you call all the time.
Yep.
I've just
happens that easy.
It does. It does. You brought up another interesting point. So back to your why, finding out, and the what. You started with that, but your bunker and the different things that you have, and how many bottles is enough. But tell us a little bit more about where your why started, and then now where your why is today.
Yeah, I think the why probably had to do with COVID and the pandemic and something to do.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of avenues got shut down in terms of getting out, being social. Just what do you do with your free time when you're being forced to have cabin fever? So that was maybe a little bit part of it. I think beyond that just became the allure, the conversation piece of it, and again it became just a way to create a new social atmosphere. So in doing that, you learn a lot. You learn a little about Ohio and the environment we have here with a control state and
Sure.
what that looks like, and
Versus an uncontrolled like a Kentucky or an Indiana.
yeah, and the fact that we don't get everything that's out there.
Also true.
So you got to get out there to go get it. But that began to shift as well, and it started to explore new labels within bourbon, new profiles. I definitely moved over to the rye side of things.
You have. Hence the why we're not on the same page.
Yeah, well, some people can't be as good as others. And so it's kind of gone through these phases now. And to be honest, at this point, I know what I like within what I'll call the common space.
Okay.
And so nowadays, I'm not going after anything new or flashy, and a lot of that's coming out. That's what the marketing's being pushed towards.
Sure.
And I think that's dangerous for people who are just getting into it.
Completely agree.
Not knocking any bottles, but Basil Hayden's Toasted might have been one of those that came out and people gobbled up and realized, there's not much inside the bottle for me.
Completely agree.
And so, again, that's kind of drifted to a point where it's I know what I like, and if there's something I haven't had that kind of meets some criteria, let's give it a shot.
Okay. So your why now would be?
So I think the why now is continuing to meet people who just share that affinity.
Okay.
Part of that too, we talked about. I even have been asked to host bourbon tastings of my own.
I was going to allude to that, yeah.
And so what's cool about that is it almost forces me in a way to take a deeper dive into whether it's distilleries or bottles or
Sure.
processes or any of those categories. And then, one of the ways you learn best is by teaching others.
I was going to say that. And, but before you even get there, and I want you to continue, but it's the history, right? You have to do the research. You also brought up history. Continue. Sorry, I was just pointing out, yes, teaching and history.
Yeah, so there's it's a cool American history story.
Sure.
The story of bourbon. I'm not going to exhaust it here, but obviously there's things at play. Just the history of the product itself, the name and where it came from and how it was founded. Which you could say that there's two different truths.
There are. That's a debate for another podcast.
But then just going through the political space and the legalities of it and prohibition. There's a very popular bottle out there that says "Vote Whiskey."
Yeah,
From Chattanooga Whiskey, who I'm very fond of a lot of their products.
it's not bourbon.
Not bourbon. But beyond that too, within the history space, I think it's just cool to be able to open people up to looking into things deeper and understanding where, what, and why in the context of the times. Bottled in Bond Act is a very cool one to understand the context of the times and why it happened. And things are still labeled bottled in bond today.
Mm-hmm.
And just understanding how that fits into our society in the U.S.
I hate to use a generic word here, but a bottled in bond product tastes different than a regularly bottled product.
There could be quite a few reasons.
Of course,
that.
I'm saying I'm using the generic term of taste, right? Again, back to all my notes, tasting notes. I'm saying taste-wise, taste in general for a bottled in bond product, different, completely different than a regularly bottled product.
Yep.
I like that you brought up the history. We talked about this even after, like I said, the last episode. You brought up your why and where you're teaching other people. I got to witness Nick do a tour of whiskey throughout the United States, and he went around to different distilleries around the United States, getting out there, full circle here. I'm going back to getting out in your state and experiencing different flavor profiles. He went around the United States everywhere but the state of Kentucky.
Yep.
And did bourbon recipe whiskeys. So they called it bourbon whiskey, which again, all bourbon's whiskey, not all whiskey is bourbon. And these different places took the bourbon recipe and made their bourbon. So they can call it bourbon whiskey, which is what a lot of them do. And you went around the whole country and stayed out of Kentucky, which there were 30 people at this, 50 people, that 30 of them doing the actual, or 25 doing the actual tasting, but the rest watching. And we didn't drink any Kentucky bourbon.
I think that's part of the fun is opening people's eyes up to these things. And again, if you don't go and get informed about it, you might think, oh yeah, bourbon's just from Kentucky and it's just from Bourbon County and all these good things. But it's amazing and it's cool to see what somebody has done with the original recipe and taken and putting their own spin on it, or brought in a whole new process and perspective into the bourbon and whiskey space.
I couldn't agree more. In fact, I'm so glad you said that. I truly believe that there's so much more to tap into. I think we're seeing it. Again, another topic for another time. I really need to start taking notes during our talks, but that's a whole nother topic, talking about marketing. You brought up marketing. I think that's a big factor in the bourbon boom right now. Different flavor profiles, mash bills, labeling of different, you just said bottled and bond. A lot of people, I don't know who was first, and maybe I can do some research, but somebody did a bottled and bond product first, not during the bottled and bond era. I'm saying post bottled and bond era, somebody did a bottled and bond throwback. And how many distilleries have done that now?
A lot.
Yeah, they just were like, oh my gosh, it's a different flavor profile. It's a different product. We need to sell bottled and bond. So I believe that is, again, I really need to start taking some notes on these. Luckily, I think we're recording it, so we could probably go back.
Well, wait for the episode about technology applied to bourbon aging and big data and AI. It's coming, baby. So that takes us to, I would never ask you a question that I wouldn't answer. So that takes me to my why. You know what? But here's my why. You just had all this shelf space to fill and had no idea what to put on them.
That is not even remotely close. But my why is this. I love and I have a passion and an obsession. I've said those words so many times in the short period of time we've been doing the 3BA podcast, but I fell in love with this spirit when I didn't have anything to grab onto, and it was at a point in my life where I needed something, and I'm not saying that you should rush to drinking. That's not an answer. I appreciated the science and the history and the intricacies, the flavors, everything that's involved with our spirit, our United States spirit, bourbon. I was just so fascinated. And my why started in a place that was, I don't know, you could say it was sad. I didn't have a lot going on where I was and what I was doing, and that's a story for another time, but my why to start was it was something to do. It was, let me go and join these people in Kentucky, the land of bourbon, where I can converse with them about their spirit that they have, that they produce and ship all over the world. And it's progressed over the last 10 years to an obsession of I love the intricacies and flavor and different mash bills and way that they're using barrel char. I didn't even know that I could be into barrel char, but I am. It's not necessarily that I want to get a toasted bottle, to your point, but the char level, the limestone water versus a natural spring water. There's just so much science and so much that goes into creating this flavor. I'm sorry, I don't have any better words right now, but it's a unique spirit in that the sweetness for me, I believe bourbon is sweet. We'll call it my opinion, but I believe this sweet nectar from the gods, if you will, is just something that continuously surprises me. You and I have talked over so many glasses of bourbon, so many different distilleries, so many different recipes about what we like, what we don't like, what we taste, what we don't taste, what is unique, what is not. Does proof have something to do with it? Oh my gosh, I can't believe they're doing this product now. Why'd they even release this? Sorry, I'm getting very passionate right now, but my why is I love this spirit. I love bourbon. My why to this day is to pass this passion that I have on to other people. Why am I doing this? Why am I doing this podcast? Why are we doing this podcast? Because I want the world to see bourbon for what I believe it is, and that is the best spirit on the market today. I don't care where you get it, how you drink it, ice ball or not. As long as you're drinking bourbon, I think that's maybe my goal. That's my why. Sorry, I went off on a tangent. You're staring at me.
I was going to say that why is pretty deep.
It was. I got deep.
So what you're saying is you don't want to trade for vodka. I
don't. And I feel as though, we could talk about this another time, but I feel like there's another spirit that's on the rise. We can talk about it a different time. But yes, sorry, there was some passion there. Yeah, I did get a little deep. My apologies.
He's misty-eyed. I know you can't see it on the camera.
You're misty-eyed. No, I'm just, yeah. Anyways, sorry, I went off there a little bit. But I am.
Here's a wrinkle though.
Let's hear it.
What's the end goal? Right, you have a what and a why. What is the end goal?
Nick,
are we doing it?
Nick, this is the beginners. This is the beginners bourbon.
I know,
for
but
beginners.
you got to start with the end in mind, right? Otherwise, again, for the beginners, the pitfall you're trying to keep them out of is from going blindly into some place that they don't even know why they're going there or what's going to be there when they get there.
True. So
or is that half the fun?
It is. It's the unknowing. It's the unknown. I've said this before. Tomorrow, the bottom could fall out. What do I mean by the bottom? Again, I ripped the Band-Aid off earlier, so we're going to talk about it. But value, right? Value. What is my collection valued at? I don't look at that. I look at, is it what I want? Do I have I collected? Have I got it? Have I finished the vertical? That's my OCD, my obsession, if you will. I've tried them all, less a few on my bar. If the bottom were to fall out tomorrow and people went and moved on to the next best thing, IPAs, I don't care, rum, tequila's
delicious,
supposedly the next thing, right? So if we went on to tequila and the value of what you see behind us dropped, I would love that. I would love it if I could find a bottle of Colonel E.H. Taylor's Next Variety Special Release for cost versus trading and begging people to get it on the secondary.
Or sleeping for 3 days in a parking lot.
Or that. So, yeah, what's the end goal? What's the end game? I don't know. My end, for me, there's a passion to collect and to make those lines look complete and fill gaps, right? You know, to your point that you made fun of me for. But I don't know. I don't know what the end game is, but I think we're on this journey together.
Well, and I think that's it, right? Is that it's a journey,
Yeah.
and it's not necessarily even about the final image of what it is, right? Because
Completely agree.
eventually, dust to dust, right?
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, this problem of yours is not going to be your problem anymore. But it is that journey. And when we go back and talk about what else it's caused you to do, it's caused you to learn some history, to meet some people, to think about how you smell and taste other things in life. You know, again, maybe that's the end game. Maybe you're just living through it, and at the end of it, it's all just personal growth, right?
It is. Listen. I love how you looked it back. I mean, you make me smile when you were saying it. I knew you were doing. There are 3 topics that we talk about, right? Bourbon, boners, and being awesome. Men's health, this crazy whiskey world, and everything else that goes along with it. And I truly do believe that the other facets that we discuss and the other avenues that we go down somewhat can be brought back to how do we grow as a person. You just said it. Let's improve our palate. And with that, we're going to do another one of these. We're going to do another intro into the bourbon game, if you will. I believe that we've talked about the beginner's level.
Before you jump in.
Yeah, right when you're getting started. I think there are some steps. I think there are some levels. I think I alluded to baseball at one point with you, like where you're at. Are you in T-ball? Are you in high school ball? Are you in college ball? We may revisit that. I don't know. I'm playing around with that idea. But where do you go from here? And I think that's a whole nother episode. But for now, for all your beginners out there, I know we talked a lot, and we both kind of told our why and got a little deeper than some of the other episodes. But I would say this: a couple things to kind of recap is go out and visit different things. Visit bars to try samples and before you try to buy bottles. Visit distilleries, learn about their process and the products that they have, and then visit other areas. If you're going to go hunting, to your point you alluded to, go say hi to another area and just see, what they have or what you might find on a shelf on the bottom with a plastic screw top that you've never tried before, but it's an MGP product. Do that. Go somewhere else. There's no trick to this for those of you out there. It's pull up your phone or your smart device and just Google. I'm not even promoting Google. Just search for something in your area and go there.
Oh, get outside your comfort zone. There's not growth within your comfort zone.
Absolutely. Do something. Go make yourself uncomfortable in a liquor store. It's easy to do.
Yeah, don't open a bottle and start drinking it. That's not what we're saying.
No. But go make yourself uncomfortable. And then some of the other things, find out your what and find out your why, or what is your why. I would find out both of those things. What are you trying to do? Are you just trying to drink a lot of bourbon? You open every bottle you got. Cool. You know how many times I've heard that? I drank it. Okay, fine. Awesome. I'll drink it with you. And then find out your why. Why are you doing this? Why are you going out and standing in line in the morning? Is it just to get a bottle that you've never seen before or you've never tried before? I promise you there's other ways to do that. And I think we talked about a few of those. So listen, it's always a pleasure. Until next time, you're going to be here regularly. So I don't want to make people think you're not coming back.
So set that calendar to recurring, huh?
Recurring Thursdays, maybe a couple other episodes. But with that being said, Nick, I'm just going to cheers you again. Thanks for coming and discussing how to get into bourbon, especially since I know how you did. And until next time, my friend, let's get together and drink some more.
Sounds good. Cheers. 3BA.